COVID has affected us all, and with all the negativity surrounding it, it's often hard to find the positive. One of the blessings it has given us is the opportunity to build an avenue for creating change, starting right here in our community. Discussing topics that affect us most, such as racism in healthcare, maintaining a positive mindset, creating change, the importance of advocacy, and the many lessons we have all learned from COVID. If you or your organization are interested in speaking engagements, send a message to quadcast99@gmail.com, reach out on Facebook at Quadcast, or online at drquadjo.ca.
Guys, we're in the middle of the pandemic and these are trying times. It's hard on our mental health, our mental state, and this is why I love our sponsor today, BetterHelp. They're the largest online counseling platform worldwide. They change the way people get help with facing life's challenges by providing convenient, discreet, affordable access to licensed therapists. BetterHelp makes professional counseling available anytime, anywhere, through a computer, tablet, or smartphone. It's brilliant. Sign up today. Go to betterhelp.com/solvinghealthcare and get 10% off sign-up fees. Welcome to Solving Healthcare. I'm Kwadwo Karamantang. I'm an ICU and palliative care physician here in Ottawa and the founder of Resource Optimization Network. We are on a mission to transform healthcare in Canada. I'm going to talk with physicians, nurses, administrators, patients and their families because inefficiencies, overwork, and overcrowding affects us all. I believe it's time for a better healthcare system that's more cost-effective, dignified, and just for everyone involved. Yeah. Welcome back, Quadcast Nation. Solving Wellness Community. We have a doozy, baby. We got podcaster, author, we got Sacred Cow, we got Wired to Eat, host of the podcast, The Healthy Rebellion, and he's also set up a beautiful community to talk about all things related to health. Robb Wolf, he is back. And I'm excited to bring this episode to you because we dive into fasting. Who's it for? Does it suit the lifestyle of healthcare professionals? What are the exceptions? Why would you not want to fast? Who's it a bad idea for? Who benefits the most? Selfishly, I got into how it affects working out too. Sorry, y'all, but I'm certain there's a few of y'all that would be interested in the topic as well. But man, Rob throws down. Before jumping into the episode, I want to tell you about Solving Wellness. Those that aren't on this bad boy, it is becoming beautiful. Over 150 members, virtual workouts, yoga sessions, cooking tips, cooking advice, nutrition advice, sleep advice, stress management tips. We're doing it all, baby. And it's been so exciting and the feedback has been tremendous. $99 for the year, $9.99 per month. You get your first month for free. And yeah, we're collectively changing that boogie and supporting each other and reducing that burnout. So thank you for those that are supporting. I hope you're enjoying this. But without further ado, let's just jump on it. The one and only Robb Wolf. Let's go. All right, Quadcast Nation, Solving Wellness Community. We got another doozy. We got the legend. Robb Wolf is back. Rob, welcome back, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me back. I'm always game to bring down property values. So thank you.
Amazing. Last time we talked, you were in Texas. You're in Montana now, closer to my what I call my motherland, Alberta. I'm sure you're loving the community, the mountainous environment. I hope that's going well for you.
We love it. The kids don't hate me anymore, so that's a good thing. Yeah.
Amazing. So the reason I brought you back was to talk about fasting or time restricted eating. And the reason I thought it'd be important to talk about is a lot of our healthcare providers, this is something that they're entertaining, the idea of either starting, they're doing it. Some people are trying it and struggling with it. And I think one of the things that we don't talk about enough, and I'm victim of this too, as a guy that does the time restricted eating, is trying to really determine who would benefit and who you got to really think about why, really should they be doing it? So maybe we could start off with where even the basics will start off with, like what you think some of the benefits are from a fasting point of view.
Yeah, so just as a bit of context, I wrote my first article on intermittent fasting in 2005, and really was intrigued by this notion that maybe we could hit this sweet spot where you're getting all of the benefits of that we saw from like the calorie restriction research, but then also could optimize performance on this too, so this balance of performance, health, and longevity and whatnot. By 2006, I deeply regretted releasing this intermittent fasting paper because it went out mainly to a CrossFit oriented crowd, and God bless our CrossFit folks, but if they're anything, they're type A. And what I started noticing is that people would report, or they would ping me and they're like, hey, I'm having some problems. Can you take a look at what I have going on? Sure. What's happening? They're like, whether it was male or female, I've had retrograde performance for 6 months. I have no libido. My hair is falling out. I cry at Hallmark, commercials and all this stuff. I'm like, okay, well, give me a breakdown on like your nutrition and training. And it's like, well, training, I do CrossFit 6 days a week. On my off day, I do hot yoga and a 30-mile ruck march. And, they're just like totally crazy, crazy amounts of volume and intensity. And then they're also intermittent fasting 20 or 22 hours a day. They eat 5 grams of carbohydrate a month. And what these folks had done is they took a bunch of good things, put them all on steroids, and then stuck them all together. They made a buffet of pain out of this stuff, right. It's fairly, if there's one thing that we know for sure, that simply exercising, whether you're overweight or normal weight, is good for you. Not overeating is good for people. I think it gets dubious beyond not overeating, whether calorie restriction or fasting does much for us versus just simply finding a spot where we eat adequate protein, get adequate nutrition, and we're not overtly overeating. Like I think that starts becoming actually kind of a challenging proposition to sell. But people had a lot of problems. They were exacerbating this overreaching, overtraining kind of phenomena. The supposed benefits of fasting, calorie restriction, it's supposed to be enhancing autophagy. We get some cellular turnover. This is supposed to be beneficial for a host of chronic degenerative diseases. But there's a couple of things that are interesting in all of that. Like Brett Weinstein, back in 2002, published a paper talking about how the mouse models that are used for everything from like drug toxicology to these longevity studies, these mice have been selectively bred in such a way that they end up with remarkably long telomeres, which makes them just incredibly resilient to cytotoxic stress, to things like huge amounts of fasting. It's something that folks don't understand, is that there have been experiments, and they're kind of gnarly, but where they will fast and calorie restrict animals to a very high degree, and it shortens lifespan. Like they're even within these animals, there's a diminishing return. There's a dose response curve in that whole story. And really aggressive amounts of fasting enhance autophagy to such a degree that the organism burns through its whole stem cell pool. We hit this Hayflick limit where cells can only replicate about 50 times. It might be a little bit more in a living organism versus a petri dish, but there is this reality that there's a balance between turning cells over and ideally letting them run the full course of their life cycle, but not become senescent, not become cancer. And there's a middle ground there. And something that folks don't appreciate is that you can fast an animal to death very, very easily, and not from starving it, but it actually runs out of stem cells, and it ends up with multiple system organ failure because there's nothing left to repair things. So there's a real balancing act in that. I don't think it's tough because somewhere around 2004, 2005, nobody's exactly sure, but humanity made this really interesting shift in that more people started dying from chronic degenerative disease from diseases of affluence than from infection, starvation, malnutrition. And that's the first time in human history. Like all of our history prior to that, deaths were attributable mainly to communicable disease and malnutrition. Then we made this shift, and it's catastrophically horrible. It's increasing healthcare costs at an exponential rate. It's increasing morbidity and mortality. You see it every day. You're earlobe deep in it. So it's really terrible. But at the same time, this somewhat, in my opinion, blunt tool usage of fasting is a little bit concerning too. I think a lot of people would benefit from just finding a normal, what is a healthy level of food consumption for them individually. And that's no small task in a modern hyperpalatable food environment where all this food around us is engineered to bypass the neuroregulation of appetite. Like it's no small order to figure out how to get people to just eat in a way that they don't poison themselves from too much eating. But then the flip side of this is folks in kind of the paleo, low carb, ancestral health space, and even in vegan communities and stuff like that, the lunatic fringe that's willing to experiment with things. These folks, in my opinion, are going way overboard on fasting. They're doing too much, and they're not considering some of the potential deleterious effects. And honestly, when I personally look at the literature and I really look critically at it, I don't see much upside above and beyond. It is a tool for calorie restriction. And Peter Attia he's got a really slick way of kind of organizing the different ways that we can attack food. Like we can take a qualitative approach, like we're going to change what it is that we eat, whether it's, protein, carb, fat ratios. We can tweak the amounts of what we're eating, and then we can also tweak the timing of what we are eating. And that the real benefit, in my opinion, of the time restricted eating or intermittent fasting, if you have somebody that is really challenged with changing the composition of what they eat and limiting the amount of what they eat, but they're willing to change the timing, you're like, hey, eat kind of whatever you want, but do it between the hours of like 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. That can really work for folks, and they can wrap their head around that. It works for them. Some people like me, I do really quite well with, modifying the type of things that I'm eating. I do pretty well on a low carb diet that satiates me. And then I find a spot where I don't overeat as a consequence of that. So I know that was like this big rangy, borderline, Parkinsonian answer where I'm bouncing all over the place. But I'm kind of underwhelmed with the real benefits of fasting, other than if any way that we can figure out a process in which people don't overeat. Like if the person is overeating and we figure out a strategy for not overeating, what happens physiologically is magic. Like they get healthy, it's just miraculous. And so I think that much of what we view as the benefit of fasting is just figuring out a way of not overfeeding the organism. And when the organism isn't overtly overfed, magic happens, health happens.
I think this is fantastic, Rob, because I think most people that are looking to do this, they're doing it for improving their metabolic health, in my opinion, or more directly to lose weight.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so framing it, I heard Peter on I think it was on his own podcast, framing it that way too, about the macros, like what type of food you're eating, the amount of calories, or look at the timing. And I think it's important to think about what your goal is, because some people will enter the fasting realm for the longevity components and what have you. But I would say for people in my world, the healthcare providers, 99% of them are looking at it for improving their metabolic health, reduce their weight gain, and approaching it that way. And,
right.
And also in my mind, I've never really gotten into the weeds of it. the two elements that I thought that made sense to me on why it helps from a metabolic point of view is yes, you're potentially reducing your calories because your eating window is reduced, but also like the amount of time your ability to improve your insulin sensitivity, because you're not having all that time with insulin spikes or what have you. I don't know if you want to touch on that too, about the insulin sensitivity aspect, or if, in terms of what you've read, if that's a consideration.
It is, and it's something that shouldn't be downplayed. I don't have the study off the top of my head, but I could ping it to you. It's in a folder I have. But folks looked at two groups of people. They were fed isocaloric diets not isocaloric. They were calorie matched for their size and activity level, but it was a mild calorie restriction. So they were calorie restricted, but they tried to match it uniformly within the two groups. One group had 3 meals a day. One group had 6 meals a day. The 6 meal a day group had poorer metabolic endpoint markers than the people that were eating less frequently. So I do think that there is some, and they were already calorie restricted. Like both groups saw some improvements, but the less frequent eating group saw better improvements. So I do think that there is humans are not grazing animals. Like we don't, under ideal circumstances, we eat a meal and we can go ideally a pretty long period of time before we get hungry again. And even if we get hungry, if we did things right, if we are metabolically healthy and flexible, we should be able to go significant periods of time without eating and not like crater, not get hangry, not have significant neurological, changes. And my wife's a great example of this. Like she can eat carbs, she cannot eat carbs. When she eats keto for a period of time, there's no difference with her. Like she doesn't notice going in and out. Whereas a lot of people, it feels like hitting a brick wall. Yeah. Yeah. But she can also eat significant amount of carbs and it just doesn't matter. And I think that is kind of what humanity kind of should be. But not everybody's Italian. So it's, and as my wife's genetics. And so, yeah, people like me that I'm pretty lean, I'm pretty active, but I have pretty hard carbohydrate upper limits. I start getting up above about 50 grams of carbohydrate in a given day. And I experience problems with that. And I do notice that two meals and a snack are good for my digestion. It's good for my cognition. That seems to work pretty well. And there's credible research that suggests that we don't necessarily need or want to eat 6 times a day. We shouldn't be 3 meals and 2 snacks. And, that there are metabolic negative consequences. Largely, we get endotoxemia exposure. Every time we eat, there is a certain inflammatory response with moving food from the gut into circulation to be distributed around the body. I think that endotoxemia piece where we're pulling a little lipopolysaccharide out of the intestinal, content, I think that might be the primary driver of the insulin resistance because as you know, a septic patient is stunningly insulin resistant. And usually they will administer significant amounts of insulin to recover that person. So I think it possibly has less to do with the food and more to do with being exposed constantly to kind of toxic intestinal content. Now, that said, I don't know that 1 meal a day is like infinitely better than 2 meals a day, particularly when we start playing around with the balance of like overwhelming the digestion with just 1 meal and also thinking about nitrogen balance and like maintaining muscle mass over time. Again, once we get past the very challenging process of finding a way to help the vast majority of people that are overweight, have metabolic derangement and whatnot. A lot of the thoughts around fasting and calorie restriction, particularly with this longevity focus is, I'm suppressing mTOR, activating autophagy, all this stuff is this hedge against cancer. But folks act as if this is like a guaranteed process. If I just fast, I won't get cancer. And something that most people don't realize is that, say, like in that identification of the cancer process, mTOR complex 1 needs to be activated early in the identification of cancer cells to then follow into activation of mTOR complex 2 when we're like activating T cells and some of the immune response. If mTOR is globally suppressed, you don't identify the cancer on the front end. You actually end up with greater, risk of cancer on the back end. So you need some amount of mTOR activation, which is activated by proteins and by carbohydrates and by calories in general. We don't want to overdo it, which I think is, when we see like really heightened levels of cancers, chronic inflammatory diseases in both animals and in humans that are overfed. It's like, okay, that makes sense. And mTOR is definitely a player in that. But something that really gets missed is all of us have a risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and neurodegenerative disease that is some number less than 1, most likely. Like it's not a guarantee for anybody. There's some risk profile there. All of us have 100% guaranteed we're going to experience age-related sarcopenia, muscle mass loss. And I see folks eating so infrequently and so low protein in the hopes of suppressing mTOR and these growth factors that I see folks making kind of a Faustian bargain. Like they are giving up the muscle mass and the resilience that they have now in the hopes they won't get a disease later. And they're likely to end up with worse things. Like they're going to be so frail that they end up dying from frailty issues and not like the chronic degenerative disease issues. I see folks in, ironically, kind of the ketogenic diet scene that are eating less protein than raw vegans are eating, and and are doing these really extended fasts, and these folks don't look healthy. They look frail. They're chronically cold, and I just don't think folks are properly appreciating some of the trade-offs there. And again, this is for kind of a fringe crowd. This is maybe like 1% of people that are even tinkering with their diet and lifestyle to such a degree that they get themselves painted into this corner. But I don't. It is a non-trivial number of folks, and the balancing act here is always, well, but the vast majority of people that are struggling probably would benefit from some degree of intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, certainly focusing on a very protein-centric diet because of the satiating effects and the nutrient density and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, so in some, like to summarize, like in some ways, if you're looking to improve your metabolic health, definitely this seems to be advantageous as one of many options to try and achieve your goals. One of the areas that seems to be where you got to be concerned or could be I'd say you got to be careful. It sounds like just taking it to extreme, like in terms of duration and thinking about what you're eating. Because this is my concern with some of, not so much of our healthcare providers, but some of the people that are taking the fasting to extreme, is that I worry that you're not eating enough. You know what I mean? I worry that you're losing muscle mass. And selfishly, I'll tell you too, Rob, it's one of those things that I'm always kind of thinking about to myself as a guy that's, I've been fasting now for over 3 years. I feel like my weight is about the same, but you always got to think to yourself, why, once again, why are you doing this? Is this, right? Are you able to achieve your goals through these techniques of like maintenance at this point? So actually, maybe my direct question is, what do you think about fast ending or time restricted eating when you've kind of like you're in your sweet spot where when you're like, for example, yourself, where you're happy with your weight, you're happy with your metabolic profile, what do you think about that in terms of adjustments or changes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've done the work of getting metabolically healthy. We're pretty lean. We're pretty active. My gut sense is like 16 hours of fasting is pretty good. Probably better than 18, certainly better than 20, for most days. And again, like if you have a day, like travel days usually end up being pretty significant fasting days for me because the food options kind of stink. Fasting helps to reset circadian biology. So like if I'm going from like West Coast to East Coast or something, like it helps you to kind of get set up with your new circadian rhythm when you travel. So there's some benefits there. But day in, day out, I think that thing of like you try to make an early dinner, front loading the bulk of your calories earlier in the day seems to have some modest metabolic benefit. I think that's all smart. Maybe once a quarter doing like a 3-day fast. I think that's great. But if the person is wondering, should I be doing 18 hours of fasting per day versus 16? Or if they're asking, should I be doing an additional day, full day of fasting per month or adding, going 48 or 72 hours, adding another day to it, and they're not already doing 2 to 4 days a week of strength training, put the strength training in there, get outside and get sun on your skin, drink some coffee, have meaningful social relationships, join a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school. So you're learning new movement, new basically a language of movement and whatnot. Like those are things that we know are so effective on the anti-aging side and enriching our life and whatnot. Whereas once you're at that spot where you're pretty lean, pretty healthy, I think that some of the time restricted eating, if anything, it's helps on the convenience side. Like I've been finding that I do a big breakfast, I might have a little snack at lunch, and then I do a modest dinner. And I have two young daughters. They're 7 and 9 years old. If I had my preferences, I would eat a big breakfast, do some type of training around noon, have a good sized meal at like 2 or 3 o'clock, and I'm done. But family dinner time and all that stuff is important. So I kind of modified that. But I think that convenience of just not being tied to a super tight eating schedule is beneficial too. Like people are stressed and harried and trying to carve out 3 meals a day. Like I can't believe how challenging that is between work, homeschooling our kids, just being around the kids and all the rest of that stuff. So like for me, deleting lunch is like this huge win. Like I'll just have a little bit of salami and cheese and I just kind of motor through and then have another significant meal later on. So I think like about 16 hours of intermittent fasting most days makes a ton of sense. Front loading calories and carbs makes a lot of sense. And then from a real down the road risk mitigation story, like I do want to try to hedge my bets against cancer and neurodegenerative disease and create a little bit more metabolic resilience, cause that punctuated stress response. I think like a 2 or 3 day fast once a quarter, that seems great. And it's interesting. A lot of the big movers and shakers in the fasting scene have really pumped the brakes on things like 7-day fast, 10-day fast and whatnot. I think that they started noticing some deleterious effects around that. And I think maybe because I was so early in this, I just saw those problems emerge earlier, and it's kind of convergent evolution on that with some of the other folks in the scene.
Yeah, because you were like an early adopter. You were able to see some of the negative consequences of those extended fasts. But I'm actually encouraged from what you're saying because, if like, once again, doing those daily fasts or the time restricted eating, not having negative impacts on muscle mass, for example, because one of the things that I find quite helpful is working out in a fasted state. I honestly, I prefer it. And ironically, some of my best lifts have been during those fasted periods.
Nice.
And so to me, it's one of it's something that I love, and I'm hoping to keep going for sure. But just a couple other thoughts too. Like, I think I want to reinforce this, really thinking about that protein intake. I think we don't talk about it enough anymore. Like maybe it's because I've been hearing a lot of keto talk, but which sometimes it's like high fat, like the emphasis is on the fat. But
Right.
I think we can't forget about that. Can't forget about the value of resistance training. Like amongst the other things you said, the community moving or constantly getting outside. But I really like to emphasize the resistance training because of its impact on insulin. I think it's so important. The other thing I was meaning to ask you about too is any advice for getting you through the fast. Like there's a few people that often ask me, I'm finding it too difficult. I feel lightheaded. I just feel like shit. And often I say, just eat. That's a sign to eat. But any, you know what I mean? But like, is there anything else that you that could help people get through this?
This is tough. One part of this is tough because on the one hand, I was saying people who don't want to do quality modification of their diet, fasting can be a tool, and it can be. Mm-hmm. But if you're eating pretty junky food and it's kind of low protein and it's a mix of kind of processed fat and carbs, there's kind of a reality you're going to get really hungry. Like when that fasting period hits, you're going to be really, really hungry unless you happen to be pretty metabolically flexible. So that's a problem. This is where some emphasis on quality of food is important, in that very protein-centric approach, getting a gram of protein per pound of lean body mass all the way up to a gram of protein per pound of body weight is a pretty good bracket. And so if folks are kind of like, I don't really want to change the stuff I'm eating, then at least, like, if you're going to do burger and fries, maybe you do a burger with 2 patties, ditch 1 bun, the top of the bun, and then have some of the fries, So we've got more protein, we've got more fat. You're not totally the weirdo that's changing everything. If you're, you're out at a business meeting and people are like, what are you doing there? And you're like, I'm just eating some more protein because it sticks with me and I have better blood sugar control. And people are like, cool. But you're not totally the weirdo that it's like, okay, 2 burgers, no bun, no French fries, all that. But a little tweak that direction goes a long way towards, helping people to navigate that fast. And then the other part is electrolytes is just this thing that is, huge. Natriuresis of fasting, this massive sodium and fluid loss that occurs when we are fasting or in a low carb eating strategy. It's a huge deal. When insulin levels drop, aldosterone drops, and aldosterone is kind of our primary hormone that causes us to retain sodium. And this can be problematic in the hyperinsulinemic person who retains too much sodium, too much fluid, and they end up with hypertension. And we know that that's a terrible thing. And it's kind of funny. The water weight loss that is associated with fasting, weight loss in general, and low carb diets in particular, is often kind of denigrated and dismissed, or like, well, you're just losing water weight. It's like, but that just water weight is like your cardiovascular disease risk just decreased, because you're not hypertensive and not beaten up on your vascular endothelium. So that's actually a really good thing, but that can become a really nasty downward spiral, and this is where folks experience things like the keto flu, lightheadedness, lethargy, fatigue. And this was a piece of my puzzle that, I'm pretty good on the biochemistry and metabolism and everything, but the need for electrolytes, specifically sodium, in the fasting period was just not on my radar until 4 years ago. And I just, man, if I could go in a time machine, there's a lot of things I would change, and one of them would be like I would really imprint into my brain this understanding that electrolytes are huge in this story. Because
you were a bit resistant to it, if I remember listening either to a podcast or something. I think you were like slow adopter when it came to the electrolytes.
I was, because I was talking to a couple of world experts on this stuff. And what do you do when you talk to a world renowned expert on something? You ignore it, of course you don't listen to that advice straight out of the gate, So I was slow to coming to this, but an interesting angle on this, or at least I think it's interesting, is that some of the compensatory mechanisms for fasting and low carb diets, if sodium isn't adequate, is a release of epinephrine, a release of cortisol. these stress hormones, and some of their secondary features are to cause us to retain sodium. Mm-hmm. So if the body is stressed because it's shedding sodium, and then you start shedding potassium to try to maintain your sodium potassium ratio, if that is happening, the body, it's like, well, aldosterone is suppressed because of low insulin, so it can release cortisol and epinephrine, which can, I think that some of the like adrenal fatigue and HPTA axis dysregulation, thyroid dysregulation that we see in low carb diets, to say nothing of just the lethargy, fatigue, keto flu, all that type of thing. This is all a consequence of just not getting enough electrolytes, and wow. Specifically the sodium piece, because it's interesting. The body does better. If we get a little too much sodium, the body is able to deal with that much more effectively than too little sodium. Like sodium is kind of the linchpin. And if that is right, the body will hold on to calcium. It'll hold on to magnesium. It'll hold on to potassium. The sodium isn't quite right. The body will start jettisoning all these, like it'll jettison calcium because it's stripping sodium out of the bones to try to normalize sodium levels. And it will pull out calcium along with the sodium. So that's problematic. It'll start jettisoning magnesium because, again, all of these, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been noodling on this. I think outside of pH, the only thing as closely, tightly regulated physiologically as pH is probably electrolyte status.
Like, oh, yeah, absolutely. Like we see it all the time. Like if you're, for example, your chloride is going to have hyperchloremic metabolic acidosis as a result
right.
of having too much chloride. So 100%.
Yeah. And those things will kill you. They'll make you feel horrible very quickly, and they can kill you in pretty quick order. So somebody ends up in an emergency room and they're unconscious. Like the first things that a doctor looks at is pH and electrolyte status, because those things will get you. So, and when you think about, every thought we have, every muscle contraction we have is a consequence of sodium potassium pumps that are integral to this whole electron transport system, ATP production and whatnot. It's not surprising that a disordering or dysregulation of sodium potassium ratios, you're going to feel like garbage really quickly. So, I mean, this ranges all the way from like the emergent life-threatening scenario of electrolyte imbalances to I cleaned up my diet, my insulin levels decreased, my body hasn't equilibrated yet, and I feel horrible either on a low carb diet or in these fasting periods. And what folks find is that, during these periods of fasting, if they get their sodium in particular on point, it's smooth sailing. Like they don't get hungry. They don't get that kind of neurological fatigue. They don't get that really like over caffeinated feel from like dinging on the adrenals and whatnot. And I think that is one of these just so unsung heroes of being able to fast effectively, is just getting adequate electrolytes.
Yeah. So thinking about that protein intake, but when it comes to that electrolyte, in my personal experience, that was one of the clear game changers. I used to just salt my water. First thing I do when I wake up, I put salt in my water and then just throw down like close to a liter. And then during the day, sometimes you're fasting, right? And because of actually need at work, and you're like, it's like, it's 12:30 and you don't have access to like something that you want to eat. A little bit of salt, actually, just having a little bit of salt at that time. And it is amazing how quickly everything changes. Your hunger, your alertness, that lightheadedness will dissipate. And so to me, this was something that was a game changer. And it's great. I mean, obviously we're backers of Element. We will be obviously posting it on our site there, but it's just a nice way to just navigate through your fast is just having that electrolyte support. And so like, what made you like it? You obviously, Element started once you went in, you dove in terms of the electrolyte side of things. So like, how do you use your
like element, for example? Are you using it while you work out? Do you work out while you do it post workout? Like, how do you integrate it into your daily practice?
Yeah, so I will do like a chocolate salt and some coffee first thing in the morning.
Salt?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Did we not send you some?
I don't know. I don't think I got chocolate salt. I'll double check, but I've been
I will
really
fix that.
Wow. When you say that, it brought me like my eyes widened, but like I've been going to town on the watermelon. Like it's been
okay.
Yeah. So I'll double check, but chocolate salt.
I will fix that. That was an oversight on our part, but I like having a cup of coffee in the morning. Shifted to mainly decaf. Like I put a little bit of caffeinated in it, but I don't know if it's one of these signs of aging, but the detox pathways don't offload caffeine the way that they did when I was a whippersnapper, and I just get kind of jittery and everything. I'll do a little bit of the coffee, a little bit of whole cream, and then mix the chocolate salt in there, and it just tastes amazing. And it's cool in that it's almost like meditation or something. Like after you do meditation or like some cyclical box breathing, for me, I guess it's getting more in that like kind of parasympathetic, like calm state. But it's I just feel calm and kind of grounded. So I definitely start the day with that. Like I just feel better with that kind of straight out of the gate. And then from there, I definitely mix up, like I'll mix up a couple of things like this, like about 16 to 20 ounces. I'll have 2 of those that I take with me to jujitsu. I'll drink one of them on the way to jujitsu, and I'll sip on it during our skill portion of class, which is demanding, but there's a lot of Q&A and, breaks and whatnot. And so it's not super, super demanding, but as we get ready to do the live rolling, which is usually about an hour, either 5 or 10 minute rounds doing that, I'll go over and grab the other can, and I'll drink about half of it right before I start rolling. And maybe about 30, 40 minutes in, I'll go over and sip on some of the rest of it. And like, I'm almost 50. There's a bunch of like savages down there that, big, strong dudes and everything. And I hang right in there. Like I have good performance. I'm not super beat up. There was recently a paper that was looking at post-exercise sodium loading and decreasing DOMS and improving HRV and basically overall improving recovery. And it was just fascinating. Post-exercise. So I'll do a little bit pre, a little bit peri, and then I definitely do some more post. And mainly what I pay attention to is like, am I feeling kind of tired? Am I feeling lethargic and kind of foggy headed? And it's funny that I'm a co-founder of the company, but I'll be motoring along and I might be a little snappy with the kids or my wife or something. And Nikki will look at me and she's like, have you had any electrolytes? I'm like, no, because I'm an idiot. Of course I didn't have electrolytes. And so I'll do the pre, peri, and post. And then the other spot that I do one, I take the raw unflavored and I put it in just a little bit of water. And I do that immediately before bed. And I don't get any GI distress from that though. Like I have a lot of gut problems, but like absorbing concentrated electrolytes, I have zero issue. Other people doing what I do, doing basically like an ounce or 2 of water and then putting the whole unflavored element pack in there. A lot of people that would send them to the toilet. So like, be careful on that. But I learned from Chris Masterjohn that doing that sodium before bed does some cool things with antidiuretic hormone and kind of tuning down the adrenals so that you stay asleep through the whole night. And that's a pretty typical, day's use for me around that. And I also try to consume sodium rich foods like olives, pickles. I don't shy away from good quality salami and like doing salami and cheese and stuff like that. Like I don't shy away from it because I am largely keto, but I get decent protein, but I get good fat and I get a lot of sodium from it. Like I get a decent whack of sodium. So that way I'm trying to get my sodium needs met from my diet broadly and not just relying on a supplemental form like Element. Yeah.
Oh, the nighttime one I find interesting. I would have thought that would have caused you to pee more at night just because the osmotic effects, but But
it does exactly the opposite, ironically. Wow. Yeah.
No, that's
so it suppresses antidiuretic hormones. So your urine volume decreases during that time because your body is like, oh shit, there's a bunch of sodium. We need to equilibrate this. So we're not sending it to the kidneys and the bladder. We're gonna hold it in circulation.
We'll retain it more. Yeah. I mean, actually, now that you say that, of course, that makes sense. Amazing. Because I do think this is something that has changed a lot for me. Even I like what you said about the DOMS, what's the acronym? The D? What's the D?
Delayed onset muscle soreness. Yeah,
thank you. Because as a guy that's middle-aged, hockey, lifting weights, that is something certainly that I've been trying to overcome. And
it doesn't matter so much in your 20s. Once you hit your 40s and 50s, you're like, damn, this is going to cripple me.
Yeah,
so,
100%. The other thing I'll be remiss not to mention, I've been reading more about like some demographics, like say middle-aged women having a tougher time with fasting. I don't know if you've come across this in any of your experience or literature, and just it was implied to me that it could be more like on the hormonal side, like that the fasting could impact them, and so like they don't see as much benefit metabolically or weight, at least weight loss wise, from like whether it's time restricted eating or these extended fast. Any thoughts on that?
If we think about this, if we put kind of our evolutionary biology lens on, it makes sense that women would experience hormonal issues really quickly in a calorie or nutrient deprived state. Like biology is like, if you're not eating enough, you're not in a good position for reproduction, but here's an interesting thing that I've seen. I've seen a lot of women that got broken from low carb eating, from fasting and stuff like that. But also the most successful people doing those things I've seen are women. So I've seen this kind of really schizophrenic thing where like the first really high level keto fueled jujitsu player that I ever ran across. Like I would search like who's using keto for jujitsu, and the first person and then the first people I saw, people winning world championships, gold medals in jujitsu were women, and they were eating keto. And I was like, damn, that is weird. Like, again, it's this really kind of weird schizophrenic thing. But what I further discovered in a lot of that was that these gals were not eating the low protein version of keto. They were eating more of a modified Atkins, adequate protein, adequate nutrition. If you're eating more protein, like some people in the keto scene get weirded out by protein because it is insulinogenic. You do get it somewhat of an insulin release. But again, hat tip to Peter Attia. He's done some amazing work in this space. He had that very low, like 4-to-1 classic epilepsy ketogenic diet that he tinkered with for like 3 years. And he did a lot of fasting and he did a lot of exercise, and his insulin was undetectable. And he was like, I don't know if that's a good thing year over year. Like insulin actually does do some important stuff. And insulin release ends up modifying like sex hormone binding globulin. It has effects on testosterone and estrogen release and metabolism. And so I think that adequate protein, like it's doing a bunch of different things. Even if you're mildly calorie restricted, it still is sending a signal to your body that like, we're okay. We're getting enough nutrition. Yeah, we're a little calorie restricted, but that, we're still consuming the things that we really need. And then if people are on top of their electrolytes, I think that that's another big part of this, because again, it like the gnarliest thing that we could do to somebody is fast them and electrolyte restrict them. And ironically, throw a lot of water on top of that. Like a dry fast, interestingly, people seem to navigate it a little bit better because we make about 200 milligrams of 200 milliliters of water per day, 200, 300 milliliters of water per day from metabolic processes, from metabolizing fat. I think a little bit of the problem that people have in the modern world is we drink too many liquids, and then we end up in that hyponatremic state just from over consuming water. So yeah, let's take a woman and we're going to calorie restrict her, fast her. She follows the standard dietary advice around water, and you drink lots and lots of water. So we're shedding sodium like crazy. We have the stress response from that, which is dinging the adrenals. We're releasing cortisol. We're releasing epinephrine. And we're adding too large amounts of water on top of that without electrolytes, which is worsening that whole process, ironically. And one of the first things that cortisol and epinephrine antagonize is testosterone and estrogen production and metabolism. So I could see where that would get women into the deep end of the pool really, really quickly. A hat tip to my co-founders of Element, Tyler Cartwright and Luis Villaseñor of Keto Gains. Their platform, they have 180, 190,000 people in their Facebook group. It is 85% women between the ages of like 35 and 60, and they are not collapsing in mass from like these hormone dysregulated, situations, but they are neurotic about adequate protein. They hound people to not undereat protein. And then they are as religious about sodium intake as they are on getting your macronutrients right. And I think that those are really the big factors there. But I think that this is, when a woman says, I experienced hormone dysregulation from low carb and or fasting. Like there is also the reality that some of these things are just not appropriate for some people. Like that, right. It's just not a good fit like that. That's it. But I think that there's another cross section of people for whom they were eating too little protein. They were taking those fasts too long. Again, like 16 hours. That's fine. Every once in a while, maybe a little bit of a longer fast. I think context is really important too. Like if you're a really mellow, calm computer programmer, not a really stressful job, doing a little more fasting is probably fine. But like if you're a medical professional, a cop, a firefighter, a new parent, you are already so fucking maxed out. Like you are just over your allostatic load is enough for like 10 people. And then you throw a signal into your body that it's like, oh, by the way, I'm starving to death too. And we would expect our body to not just like go bananas on that. Like it's asking too much of our very adaptable biology. But I think that there's a lot of nuance there, but I would say that I think that women benefit more from consistency. And so like if they're looking at kind of a weight loss strategy, man, that adequate protein, and we do 3 resets a year within our Healthy Rebellion community. And I have people that have followed my work for 15 years. They love paleo, they love keto, but they're like, I never have been able to, really get the body composition I want. But you think that they're familiar with my work. We hold their feet to the fire to weigh and measure their food. And none of these people are eating adequate protein. They're 25 to 50% deficient in the bottom level of protein they should be getting.
Right.
And so the long and short of that, I've never seen somebody with body composition issues that was eating adequate protein. Like it never happens. If you eat adequate protein, the body composition just kind of magically comes in as an after effect. And when you start eating adequate protein, you do a really robust breakfast. It's smartly composed. You motor along and you're like, it's lunch and like, I'm a little snacky, but I'm not bad. And again, maybe you have a little some jerky or something to get you through. You don't really need all that much. You do some exercise. Then you like dinner time rolls around. You're like, damn, I'm hungry and I'm going to eat because I had breakfast and I had a little snack. And then you get to have a very satisfying protein rich meal too. But I think women do really well on a schedule like that, and maybe a little bit of fasting. But I do think that they need to be cognizant that their system is going to be more reactive to stresses like that because it should be. Yeah.
Now, I like what you said. Number one, consistency. I think I could echo that, how important that is for many of our listeners. The other component is I actually don't think people realize how much protein is like enough. Like when you say a gram per lean body mass, or if, some people gram per pound. Like that's a lot of protein.
It's actually a lot of protein.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I don't. So hearing you say that a lot of people don't achieve their protein needs or goals, and it doesn't match up with their body composition. I guess what I'm saying is it's not surprising. Because once again, it's a lot of protein.
It is a lot of protein. And the funny thing is folks go from this spot of, I can't stop overeating. Like I can't stop doing that. I just eat all the food. I eat all the food. Then we get them eating adequate protein and they're like, good God, I can't eat all this food. Please, can I reduce my protein intake a little bit? And you can have other stuff, but it's eye-opening how satiating and how nutritious it is to get those protein-centric foods and really make that the hub of your dietary intervention. And I think a really simple way to tackle that is by hook or by crook. Make sure you get that protein 2 or 3 meals a day, somewhere around there. And because of the amount of protein, 3 meals a day may be better, because we are asking you to eat a significant amount of protein. And then from there, figure out, do you run better on a little bit more fat? Are you a little bit better on a little more carbs? Or maybe a combo of those two. And then the final little cherry on the sundae is I ask people to be aware of immunogenic foods. Like if you have some gut issues, if you have some inflammation issues, maybe we should avoid gluten. Maybe we should avoid dairy. Maybe you react to eggs, which is a huge bummer in, telling people to eat a very protein-centric way. For years, I attributed a lot of problems that I had. I thought it was blood sugar dysregulation, but I was intolerant to eggs. Like it gives me really foggy headed kind of response. But that's kind of the cherry on the sundae. And it really is operationally super easy. Like just make sure you get enough protein, figure out if you run better on fat or carbs. And that takes a little bit of tinkering. It's pretty easy to do. And then like if you have some remaining, niggling problems like gut issues or something, let's take a look at immunogenic foods.
Oh, I love it. I love it, Rob. I know we're on the clock, but I just got to ask you quickly. Have you played with CGMs?
I have. Yeah.
Of course you did. Of course you did. It's in your book. Just because one thing that came to mind when it came to the protein aspect of things, one thing that I noticed personally is that even if I have carbs, but if I front load it with the proteins or something fatty, much less of a spike compared to like if I have a ton of carbs first and then hit up my protein.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean that, bodybuilders knew that back in the 80s. The bodybuilding magazines would say, eat your protein first, then your fibrous veggies, and then eat your carbs last. And science dismissed it for ages, for 30 more years. And it was like, oh, if you eat protein, then fibrous veggies, and then your carbs, it dramatically attenuates the blood glucose response, and all kinds of good things come from that. And that's where there's a lot of weird bro science and stuff like that. But people at that, physique competitors know a lot. Like they just experimentally and coaching wise, those people know a lot. And there's never going to be randomized controlled trials for lots of it. Or the things that we discover usually 20 or 30 years out of date. But those folks, when performance and gold medals and things like that are really on the line, like the coach that is there tinkering is a scientist. They're not conducting like a peer-reviewed trial type thing, but they are experimenting. They're pulling different levers and whatnot. And that is such a powerful tool. And again, let's say somebody they're just like, dude, I just don't want to, I like my nachos or whatever. And it's like, cool. I love nachos too. When you order them, get triple meat.
Yes.
And tell the proprietor, I will pay you for 3 plates of nachos. Put 3 plates of meat on the nachos, and you pick through and you eat the protein first. And then you have a little bit of guacamole with it, or a lot. And then you kind of, you do your damage on the chips. That is going to be an entirely different response glycemically, metabolically, versus this protein devoid plate of nachos that you just crush all these fried corn chips, and there's no protein there. There's not the right types or the right placement of fat to attenuate that blood glucose response. And these are a lot of the little tweaks where it's like, dude, you don't need to be like, gold star level 10 paleo Jedi to just make better choices. Again, you order a hamburger, ditch half the bun, 2 patties. If you do French fries, maybe do half the French fries, but it's like, is that, and for the love of God, don't have a sugared beverage. Like
that's a no-brainer.
That's a no-brainer. There is no negotiating there. Do not have the sugared beverage. But is that really woe is me? My life is horrible. I just had this a meal that someone else cooked for me, and I'm wealthy enough to be able to buy a meal that somebody else cooked for me, and I took half of the goddamn bun and only ate part of the fries. Is my life really over as a consequence of that? We should be resilient and grateful enough to be like, that's awesome. And you will look, feel, and perform better. I guarantee that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's easy to do. But this is I think a piece of this. We've gotten so sophisticated in this health and wellness nutrition space. People are biohacking and intermittent fasting and injecting things into their penis and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, that's cool. But just telling people, ditch part of the bun, don't eat all the fries, and order an extra patty on your burger. That is going to provide 95% of the benefit of injecting your penis with leukotrienes and all this stuff. It's we don't need to go to Crazyville to get almost all the benefits of all this other stuff.
This is what I love, Rob. It's like these tweaks, and it doesn't even have to be, or nudges even, to just make yourself that much more flexible in terms of your metabolic health and profile, and the timing of what you eat, the macros, having that protein up front, saving the carbs for later. This just little things. Walking after your meal, by the way, another great one for reducing that insulin response. Rob, I gotta thank you. There was too many gems in here, and that I know selfishly, honestly, I often just want you on the show so I could talk about some of the stuff I'm so interested in. But I know as well our listeners will benefit so much from the benefits from fasting. Who should think about, who shouldn't be fasting, how to fast, duration of fasting, how to complement things with your metabolic health by what you're eating, the order of what you eat. So many gems in here, Rob. So from our community to yours, man, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show once again.
Doc, huge honor, and thank you for the amazing work you're doing. You really are at the front line of doctors doing amazingly good work, and just can't thank you enough for what you do.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I mean, you're getting that from Robb Wolf, yo. I'd be blushing if I could, Quadcast Nation. Thanks again.
Yes. Quadcast Nation, solving wellness community. This was what it was all about. All things fasting with Robb Wolf. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook at Quadcast. Leave any comments at quadcast99@gmail.com. Jump on that Solving Wellness train. Go to solvingwellness.com. Check us out. Join the movement for reals. Leave that 5-star rating. Leave those comments. Helps with the visibility of the show. Go to iTunes, do that. And honestly, if you're enjoying the show, tell a friend, tell a neighbor. Let's continue to change that boogie together, yo. Thank you so much, guys. We'll connect again real soon. Peace.